Now, on 105.9 FM and streaming worldwide on the WMAL app. O'Connor and Company.
It's 8:07 on this Friday in your nation's capital as we round things out here on this morning program and then hand it off to Chris Plant 1 hour from now for the Chris Plant Show. But check this out. In 30 minutes, we'll speak with Jason Miyares, Attorney General of Virginia, on the brink of re-election, we're hoping here, in the final days of that campaign against, well, a very disturbed individual, Jay Jones. That's all coming up. First, though, I want to introduce the effervescent and incredible Patrice Onwuka. Good morning, Patrice.
Good morning, Larry. Happy Friday.
If we must, yes. It's not a happy Friday or any other day for the members of the international drug cartels who have been trying to bring drugs and fentanyl and poisons and human trafficking and sex trafficking and murderous gang activities into America, as President Trump vowed to stop them, and he's been engaged in some military strikes against boats coming from Colombia and Venezuela and basically liquidating them there in the ocean. Is that okay? Is that the right thing to do? Is it necessary? Let's bring in an expert, former Army armor officer, extensive military intelligence experience as well, and a chief intelligence officer at Artorias, Stefano Ritondale. Mr. Ritondale, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
So first, on the basic, is this necessary? Is this, as they keep saying, war on drugs, war on terrorism, war on these cartels? Is that the proper language to use? Because we're using our military and our Pentagon, our Department of War, as it's now being called, to stop these people.
You know, I will personally say I think the war on drugs, I don't like that term, and I think one of the reasons why is when you're analyzing organized crimes and cartels in South America, and if you specifically look at Mexico, they're involved in a lot of different activities, not just the drug trade or even human trafficking. I mean, Reuters, for example, yesterday had a great report of how the Jalisco New Generation cartel is engaged in fuel theft operations using maritime tankers valued at $20 billion annually, right? These are groups that leverage a lot of different things, both illegal or illegal, even avocados, to make money and send it over to the United States. So the war on drugs, I wouldn't consider it a fair description because it's much more expansive than that.
You know, it's so interesting. I think the larger point is, you know, where is the United States' role here? President Trump is, you know, sinking these cartel boats to stop the drugs from coming into our shores and potentially now taking this to a land operation. From a defensive to an offensive positioning here, do you think the United States is justified both in its intention as well as the tactics that it's using?
So what I would say, I think the United States is basically fitting a mold that we're seeing across Latin America, which is basically just the militarization as a whole in dealing with these cartels and organized crime groups. You know, South American countries have realized that their only real tool that they have is the military. I mean, you can look at it in Mexico as a perfect example, even Colombia. And I think the president is just leveraging that. I mean, we always had the questions of legality, and I will be honest, I am not a war expert in international law or anything like that. But I think it just fits the general mold that we're already seeing of militaries across the world having their countries around the world using their militaries to deal with this specific problem set and the threat it does. And I think the Venezuela case, we are dealing with a nation state, which is the Maduro regime, the illegitimate Maduro regime. And so that I think does provide more ample evidence and support for the use of the military because it is a government that is just an international drug trafficking organization.
Cory Booker on the floor of the Senate the other day was talking about this, and there's a suggestion here from the senator. I don't want to put words in his mouth. Let's hear what he had to say, but my impression is that he believes there needs to be some level of due process for people who are conducting these activities. Take a listen to what the senator said and then comment.
When we took the extrajudicial step to blow up speedboats, there has been no oversight into that claimed attack on people that were allegedly smuggling drugs. We are constantly not doing our job, which is not a partisan one. It is to hold this president in check.
I mean, again, you're not a legal expert on this, but is that feasible to have some sort of, you know, I guess the question is, how do you know they're really narco-terrorists? How do we trust the intel, or is this just innocent people out for a joyride in the South Caribbean?
No, I mean, I think that is, I do believe that, I mean, there is always that concern, don't get me wrong, and I think it's very important to highlight it. You're never going to hear me argue against oversight or stuff like this. I will say that, the vessels that we see just on the video, it's clear that these are drug trafficking vessels, but it's also important to note that generally the people that are involved at this level, that are the people at the speedboats, are very low level, and most of the times they just it's easy money for them, specifically because of lack of economic opportunity in South America. The United States is taking a different approach. We do have international navies. The French Navy, for example, is very active in the Caribbean. They seized almost 9 tons of cocaine just last week from a maritime vessel. And so I think those are legitimate kind of concerns. The issue, though, we saw is that when the United States, there was a recent strike and 2 people survived. One of them was sent to Ecuador and the other one in Colombia. Both of them were let go because they just had nothing to prove in a court of law why they were sent to prison. And I think that's kind of the issue we're running into, is that we haven't really done a good job, unlike, let's say, the Somali pirate situation, and maybe that's the best example, is if we detain them, setting up processes internationally and regionally to make sure they get caught, and more importantly, get information from them to really go down and dismantle these organizations at the heart of South America.
We're speaking with Stefano Ritondale. You are an Army vet and Chief Intelligence Officer. You also are the co-founder and operator of All Source News, which is an X platform monitoring of cartel activity. I think to your last point, I think it's interesting. If these are low-level guys that are getting caught up in these boats, will they actually have a lot of information that would be useful to get the kind of the bigger fish? But really about the All Source News. Are you seeing, based on what you've observed of the Mexican cartels, any changes to the kind of activities as a result of greater enforcement by the Trump administration? Like, what are they doing differently now as a result of what's being done at the southern border, et cetera?
So I think one of the things, I'll just kind of speak broad terms. One of the areas we have seen is kind of a change is, I think, like, if you look at human smuggling, and I think a lot of the human smuggling operations is not necessarily cartel related. There's a lot of local and family organizations that just pay a fee to operate at the border and do human smuggling. What we have seen a change there. In other words, what we've started to see is kind of 2 aspects. One, more well-established organizations, they kind of switch from a quantity in the sense of pushing people across the border at large numbers to basically what I would call a quality. In other words, now the focus is we understand if they get caught at the border, they're going to get deported. So now they've done much more advanced processes to try to get them across, either utilizing drones, tunnels, and basically that's what we're seeing. So the quantity has gone down, but the ability to try to bypass Border Patrol, let's say, that's now the huge focus, and that's something we're seeing. And then those organizations that basically haven't been able to adapt because of the change of the border, what we've seen along the U.S.-Mexico border, specifically in the northern towns of Mexico, we've seen a significant increase of crimes, specifically extortion and kidnapping, which indicates that these groups, since they can't make that much money now pushing people across the United States, they're just reverting back to terrorizing Mexican civilians inside of the country, either with extortion or kidnapping. That's probably the main change that I've seen along the U.S.-Mexican border.
Well, and Stefano, real fast, we only got about 30 seconds, but you've written about the militarized cartels in Mexico. All these activities with the boats coming up from Colombia, Venezuela, is that really sending a signal that, the next step is really where the super threat is to our borders and our nation, and that's Mexico, and the Mexican government needs to do something, otherwise here we come? Is that what you're reading here?
I think where the Trump administration has been very successful is pressuring the Mexican government, both, with these public rhetorics and kind of diplomatic. And we have seen the Mexican government respond. One of the major successes is the Mexican government, Claudia Sheinbaum, the president, she basically kind of tweaked the law. And instead of now going through this very lengthy extradition process that involved Mexican judiciary, which really stand up and allowed cartel leaders to stay in Mexico in prison and still operate, she managed to change the law to basically mean expulsion. In other words, they're expelled directly, so they bypass the Mexican judiciary, and a lot of these key cartel leaders are now in U.S. prison because of that. And I think that's a huge success. We are seeing the Mexican government concerned about it, but we are seeing them respond and being successful there.
Stefano Ritondale, thanks for joining us. Appreciate the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
8:15 WMAL.